Hello, everyone. This is Dr. Ryan Pacatte, and I'm going to go through our proposed budget for the 26-27 school year. Thank you for tuning in. This presentation is going to hit upon a couple of topics, from revenues to expenses to the local contributions, reserves, and the final budget. If at the end of the presentation I have communicated what is on the ballot, who is on the ballot, when do I cast my ballot, and where do I cast my ballot, then I will feel like it's been a successful presentation. So let's dive in. I think there's a misconception in terms of planning for the school budget. Um, it's a heavily regulated process and a heavily structured process. In order to make the best decisions possible, we consult with a variety of experts in the field, from our municipal advisors in Bernie Donegan's office, or BPD. Questar BOCES has a very robust school finance COSER that we subscribe to. When needed, we talk to the New York State Department of Finance. We work with financial partners to help us manage some of our investments in CashVest 3+1 financials. Genesee Valley BOCES has a number of very talented business officials. Some of those have become superintendents in the area, and we pick their brains on matters related to school finance. Forecast 5 Analytics gives us a variety of dashboards that we can take a look at to look at long-term expenses, things like staff ratios, things like average pay. It also gets into some of the school performance information as well. The New York State Association of School Business Officials has a very robust professional learning opportunities that they put forward. And our auditors, we're heavily regulated. We're audited every single year as part of the annual budget process. And then occasionally we also work with the comptroller's office to do more extensive auditing. So it's a heavily regulated and informed field. I think there's a misconception that when we think about how decisions are made as a school district, that it's the superintendent or the administrative team working with the Board of Education and just kind of winging it in terms of how we want to invest or spend monies. Instead, it's a very informed process with a number of experts, and we make the best decisions that we can to put forward student programming that is as robust as it can possibly be now and into the future. When we're making these decisions, our Board of Education works with a few core principles. They want to annually respond to need. When we can, we want to align our resources to goals. We're going to keep cuts when they're needed away from student learning and people as best we can. We want to think about implications on future budgets. We need to keep moving forward, and we want to make sure that we're valuing community support and feedback. These core principles haven't changed over the last several years. So let's dive into some of the expenses. So this is the big buckets of where we will spend money in the proposed budget. You can see salaries, the payroll benefits that get attached to salaries, and the health insurance benefits are primarily the biggest drivers of the budget. For us, that is approximately 65% of our total budget goes to the people. We're a people-led business, and so that's where most of the allocation of resources goes. We partner with BOCES services for not only student programming, but a variety of, for instance, like legal services and policy information, school safety information related to fire inspections and air quality inspections, things like that. So the BOCES services is something that it's going up. All agencies are feeling some of the expenses related to inflation, related to cost of living, et cetera. You can see a pretty sizable jump here in the debt service. I'm going to talk a little bit more about this under the revenues also. This is related to the capital building project that we are in the process of committing to long-term financing for. So you'll notice about a 1.8 jump in the expense. When we plan these projects, we plan them very carefully so that when the expense becomes something that we are responsible for, the state aid that we receive for the project to pay that expense, and that's why there's no additional tax impact for the projects that we complete the way we're currently doing them. And then the last bucket is a variety of contracts, whether it's for gas and oil and utilities, and or our SRO program, just reflecting some modest increases to expenses related to the contractuals, contracts, and supplies. So where does money come from when we put forward a budget? So in New York State, there are really three big buckets that that account for where most of the funds come from. There's the real property taxes that are considered the community's investment in the annual programming via the tax levy. There's state aid, which has a variety of state aid kind of categories or buckets. And then there's a modest amount that comes from other returns, such as pilots and or interest earned on investments that the district makes, and then appropriated fund balance from the prior year. So when you take a look at the real property taxes, I'm going to communicate that with the allowable tax levy increase this year, we apply New York State's formula and calculate the allowable levy as 4.56% increase to the levy. So go back to 24-25 to 25-26, there was a 0%. For next year's budget, we are proposing that we need to utilize the full investment from the community to make the programs go. State aid and foundation aid, as of right now, we do not have a state budget approved, but we are anticipating a 2% increase in state aid through a variety of different categories. We pulled out this expense-driven aid because this is the aid that we receive for capital construction or building aid. And you can see that this amount pays for the increased amount of expense related to construction. You can see the change here is in the debt service transfers category is congruent with the amount of aid being received here in the state-driven expense-based aids. And then if we just went forward with those categories, we would not have enough money. Our expenses would exceed our revenues. So for the second year in a row, the district is proposing to use more than $1 billion worth of reserves to help balance the budget. This is something you can see a downward trend in the use of reserves. This is not sustainable use of reserves. We need to come up with a plan that truly balances expenses and revenues on a year-to-year basis. I want to spend a little bit more time talking about how these pools of resources come together. So in this graphic, you can see this largest stream, the state aid, accounts for about 53% of the total budget that needs to go into this lock so we can get even with what it's going to cost for the 26-27 school year. So this portion comes from state aid. As I communicated, we do not have an approved budget at this particular point in time, but we do anticipate that to come forward. The local tax levy, this is a variety of tax that's paid by each property owner that becomes an investment that gets pooled with the state aid that becomes the investment to help us account for safe passage into the school year. If these two sources don't raise the level enough to move into the school year, then the school district comes over to this other side of the graphic, and we use reserves. So this is something that can be short term. It can be used as a budget plug to get through a year or two, but it's not a sustainable use of revenues or the savings account. So in perfect years and better years, the levy and the state aid themselves would account for all of the resources that are needed. We are making adjustments now to better account for that, but as of right now, this is part of a planned spend down of some of our reserves. So what does the tax levy account for? So the levy is simply the total amount of monies paid by the property owners as an investment in the school program on a year-to-year basis. So you can see that $11.4 million, if approved by the community, will account for about 38% of next year's budget. All of those funds are pooled together, combined with the state aid to make up most of what we spend on a year-to-year basis. As a percentage of the school budget, you can see that the overall tax levy, that total amount of money invested by property owners, will account for about 38% of our budget. So you can see that in years past, it accounted for about 48, closer to 50% of our budget, to now being in the upper 30s. I don't see how we can continue to move downward here. This is a reflection where we really need to balance expenses and revenues as we consider the decisions that need to be made moving forward. I know that there's a lot of conversation right now about tax assessments in the community, in our communities, and the community around the state. Now, the fear is that if my assessment on my property goes up, my tax is automatically going to go up by that double amount as well. And that's really just not how it works. The tax levy has some controls on it. So let's take an example of splitting the check when you go out to eat with some friends. We all go out to eat with our friends. And you can think in the upper left-hand corner, we have a variety of people who order different things off the menu. And when the total check comes, it's about $100. You can see that the people pay based on what it was that they consumed. So the value of what they had is what they basically have to contribute to make this check payable. So if we go out to eat 3 years from now, the prices for those commodities may go up. So you can see in the lower right-hand corner, the prices for the meals, even though they're the same meals depicted in the images, may go up by 30, 40, 50, or 35%. So the total value of the meal itself has gone up. And if we paid on that, it'd be a $139 check that comes to the table. But in New York State, there is a tax protection system for the communities, and it limits, based on a formula that's calculated every year that looks at economic circumstances of the community, it limits how much we can actually ask people to pay. So with the protection put in place, the value can exceed what is calculated by the protection. So the value could go to $139, it could go to $175. The value, similar to what your assessments are, can go way up, but the total monies, the total resources that are calculated as the community's investment in the school program is limited by the New York State allowable tax cap calculation, which we do on an annual basis. So in this scenario, even though the value may be much higher, the total amount to be paid for the meal is $104.56. So then each person pays based on their approximate percentage of that total amount. So that's how it works in a nutshell. It's hard to explain all of the moving parts, but you get the idea that this metaphor of splitting the check with some protection of how high the bill can actually go is really how the tax assessment and the tax levy work on a year-to-year basis. If you're looking to learn more about that, we have done a tax finance workshop this week, and we will do one on Thursday, May the 7th. There'll be another tax information session, and we plan to do another one next week after the newsletter it hits the mailboxes via the Penny Saver. A little bit more on tax levy history. So this is a provision, a protection that was put in place nearly 2 decades ago. Now we're approaching 2 decades at this point. And you can see that each year we have to do a calculation that what would be the allowable levy. What did the financial circumstances in the community suggest the community should invest in the school program each year? So that is shown in green with that actual amount that gets calculated. That is the maximum allowable levy that could be passed with a simple majority. The blue reflects what the district has actually proposed as the levy increase as part of our budget. So we show you what the allowable formula calculated, and then the blue shows what we actually proposed as a budget. So what you can see is a 10-year trend with 9 years established and the 10th year being the year that's ahead of us. You can see that over the 10 years, on average, the allowable levy for Avon has been about 2.74%, but the proposed levy via the school budgets is about 1.64%. So you can see whenever this blue is way below the green, then that is meant that the district, the Board of Education, has chosen to utilize other funding streams rather than go to the allowable levy that was calculated for the community. So you can see a 10-year history of going out on average more than a full percentage point below what the allowable levy calculated for the district based on the district itself, the community's economic circumstance. Since the reserves are something that were talked about before, you can see in order to balance this budget, to come up with that $1 million that we're using to balance the budget this year, you can see robust contributions from the workers' compensation reserve, the employee retirement system reserve, and the teachers' retirement system reserve to account for the $1 million worth of reserves to balance the 26-27 proposed budget. And then on the right-hand side of this slide, you can see the planned use of reserves that the district has been putting forward. So you can see from the left-hand side, during the initial years of COVID, and during when New York State finally fully funded Avon based on its own foundation aid formula, in those years we did not need to rely on the reserves, whereas increasingly we are showing as part of a planned spend down, but also a need to further rely on the reserves that we have to balance the budgets over the last 3 years. This is something that we're going to need to pay close attention to because the use of reserves at this level is not a sustainable effort in order to keep the budget balanced. We're very proud of this year's budget. We're putting in place a budget that is advancing a number of opportunities for students. We're preserving all essential programs. We're really capitalizing on attrition. We've had some retirements this year, and we're looking at every one of those positions closely to examine whether or not that is a position that we need to fill. And in some cases, we are making the decision to downsize the staffing. In total, we're reducing in order to balance the budget, we're reducing our positions by 14. This year, the vast majority of those positions are positions associated with the retirements or a change in the actual need. We may not need a position any longer. This continues the district's history of tax levy management. I showed you that 10-year trend of being on average, more than a full percentage point below the allowable calculation. We are preserving our safety programming in partnership with Avon Police Department in the Village of Avon to have our SROs assigned to the elementary school, middle school, high school. Very happy that we were able to preserve that programming. And then we're also preserving and enhancing opportunities for students. So for the last couple of years, we've been working on the New York State Smart Scholars Grant. That Smart Scholars Grant makes it possible for us to provide access for students to take dual credit coursework with GCC that may not be possible otherwise. In the lower right-hand corner, if families were to pay for these courses simply for dual credit, it would be an additional $105,000 coming from families to these opportunities. If the community were to pay the rates that all community members, not dual credit high school students, pay, then you can see the GCC tuition would be more than $300,000. Comparable to SUNY rates would be about $400,000 in private schools based on the number of credits our students are able to take. It's about 1,400 credits that our students have been able to take over the last couple of years via their high school programming. So that's an incredible opportunity. And at the same time, where this early college high school concept is being advanced, we're also seeing record numbers of enrollment in our CTE program, some fantastic trades programs offered through our BOCES collaborative. So really trying to target and make robust opportunities for post-secondary employment available to our kids. And then finally, as part of the budget conversations last year, there was conversations about the use of reserves and planned use of reserves. This fulfills the Board of Education's commitment for a structured spend down of about $5.7 million worth of reserves that were able to grow during the time of COVID and when New York State was able to fully fund our foundation aid. So the overall impact I mentioned, it's about 14 total positions that we are losing as a result of this, but close assessment, we've managed the impact of student programming as best we can through those 14 positions that we'll no longer have. We're also utilizing the $1 million from reserves in order to balance the budget. Some other areas of other minor changes in order to get there, we are trimming the conference budgets, facilities, athletics, summer enrichment, and tutoring budgets, as well as increasing our utilization on the federal grants, and we're being more aggressive with our projected revenues. The budget contains, as we've done for the last 3 years, some smaller capital improvement work, the capital outlay project and transfer to capital projects. That's about $270,000 worth of structured capital improvements based on the approval of the annual budget. We're focusing this work, as in the past, we've done a number of capital improvements as part of our large publicly approved capital referendum project. This capital outlay and transfer to capital projects have done smaller work related to upgrading some of our physical education and athletic spaces due to the requirement to change mascots. And then in last year's budgets, we approved some climate controlled spaces for our 5-6 wing to meet a New York State regulation for climate controlled classrooms. And then for next year's budget, we are proposing to address some of the energy efficient lighting at the elementary school, getting into the classroom spaces to start improving some of the efficiency of the lightings within the classrooms. So what is on the ballot? The first 3 propositions are propositions that Avon does every year. It's the total spending limit, the total budget of the $29,834,388. Each year we have to do a proposition to approve the purchase of school buses. This is a traditional school bus, and there's been a lot of buzz about zero emissions or electric buses. This is not the proposal for an electric bus at this particular point in time. We have applied for a waiver for the next 2 years to suspend the requirement that we start transitioning our fleet until we have a better understanding of where the law is going and what our actual needs would be. Each year we buy equipment such as lawnmowers and or a vehicle replacement, perhaps for a utility truck, from student furniture, school classroom furniture, from the vehicle and equipment reserve. These funds are already set aside. We simply cannot access the funds for the intended purpose without community approval. This has been a tradition at Avon for more than 20 years now. The amount has gone up some to keep pace with some of the expenses, but these funds already exist, and we're just seeking permission to spend the funds on the proposed equipment. As part of this year's budget, we're proposing a small capital improvement project. This would be a total of about $4.5 million. Items to be addressed in this small capital project would be some additional climate-controlled spaces in the 7th and 8th grade wing. We would look at window treatments and fixtures. Many of the blinds are out of date, in disrepair, and we're having a very hard time locating parts for that. We're looking to upgrade the mental health wellness suite at the elementary school and address some athletic spaces for cheer and wrestling via the storage of the mat systems, and also add some external athletic facilities related to softball and baseball in the forms of batting cages. So that's a small capital improvement project that we're proposing. The local share of this would be paid for by utilizing monies that already exist in a capital reserve to cover the local share. So the funds are already there, and we're simply seeking permission to allocate those funds for the intended project. And then once this takes place, we will also receive our anticipated building aid of about 86% on the aidable portions of the project that will be returned to the district. Proposition 5 is related to the Avon Free Library. So in the past, the district has collected a levy on behalf of the Avon Free Library. It's a funding mechanism for the library where the levy for the library is paid in association with the school tax levy bill. In the fall, Avon Free Library engaged a different process with the voters to align itself with the funding mechanism through the town. So a vote on this, a yes vote on this, simply removes the levy paid via the school tax bill, the portion paid for the Avon Free Library. So you're really voting to remove this tax, this additional tax, from your tax bill associated with the school. And then Proposition 6, this has received some community interest over the last couple of years. We're assessing whether or not the community would like to change the way we elect Board of Education seats. Currently, each seat on the Board of Education is voted on as a specific office, whereas it's more common in schools of our size in New York State for an at-large voting process. So each person can announce that they're running for the board, then the total votes will establish who gets the actual seats, as opposed to having to run as each seat as an individual competition. A yes vote would change it to an at-large process. A no vote would preserve the way that it's currently being done. So that's the what is on the ballot. The who is on the ballot. There are 2 seats up this year. The one is occupied currently by Dr. Steve Cuomo, completing his first term as a Board of Education representative. The second seat is Mr. Rodney George, who has been on the school board since 1999, serving as its president since 2004. These are the 2 seats that are up. They're currently occupied, and Mr. George and Dr. Cuomo have submitted their petitions to run for re-election to these seats. Where and when do I cast my ballot? The statewide vote on school budgets in Board of Education takes place on Tuesday, May the 19th. From 1 p.m. to 9 p.m., and that'll take place in our middle school library. So Tuesday, May the 19th, from 1 p.m. to 9 p.m. in the Avon Middle School Library. So that should cover what's on the ballot, who is on the ballot, and where and when do I cast my ballot. It's a lot of information. If you have questions, please feel free to reach out to us. We'll happily provide as much information as we can. Please contact our district clerk, Jen Van Rye, at the email address above, or some of our financial representatives, Kristen Murphy or Eric Spanbauer, who are working in partnership to establish this budget for this year. With that, I thank you for your time. Please enjoy the rest of the day and reach out with any questions that you might have. Thank you.